The vet's door closed behind me, and I stood in the gravel lot holding an empty collar, and a man I trusted leaned out and said the words that gutted me. He said, "Don't torture yourself. It was only an animal. It's just gone now. Just gone." I got in my truck, and I couldn't turn the key. I sat there for the better part of an hour with that leather collar in my fist, and something in me broke that I did not have language for. Because I believed him. For years I believed him, and that belief cost me more peace than I can ever get back. Here is what I want you to understand before you lose one more night to it the way I did. The idea that your animals simply blink out of existence, that the love between you and a creature who trusted you means nothing to eternity, is not something the Bible teaches. It is something you were told, and the people who told it to you were wrong about what the oldest pages of Scripture actually say. The Amish and the Plain communities never accepted that lie, and they held on to 7 passages that most modern pulpits quietly stopped reading aloud. I am going to give you all 7, and I am going to end on one buried line written down in a Pennsylvania German household record I saw with my own eyes, dated to the 1840s, that settled this question for me forever and stopped the grief from eating me alive. This is not for people on some faraway farm. This is for you, in the home you have right now, with the animal sleeping at your feet or the one whose absence still aches. Stay with me, because the comfort at the end is the part nobody gave me when I needed it. Let me take you back to how I got so lost in the first place. I grew up going to a big brick church with a tall steeple and a paved parking lot, and I was taught very confidently a clean and tidy theology. Humans have souls. Animals do not. Humans go on. Animals stop. It was said with such certainty that I never thought to question it. Nobody ever opened a Bible and showed me the verse. They didn't need to. It was simply the air we breathed. And for a long time it didn't matter to me, because I hadn't yet loved an animal enough for the question to have teeth. Then came a brown and white dog named after a river, who slept across my boots every winter for 14 years, who knew my moods before I did, who waited at the same window every single afternoon. And when she died in my arms on a cold March morning, that tidy theology turned to ash in my mouth, because I could not make myself believe that all of that faithfulness, all of that love, was worth less to God than a rock or a fence post. And when I said as much to the people at my church, they patted my shoulder and told me not to get sentimental. They told me the Bible was silent on this. That was the lie. The Bible is not silent. It is loud. I just had never been shown where to look. The first time anyone showed me was on a Plain family's porch in the eastern part of Ohio, and I want to walk you through what that old man told me, because it began to give me back everything the steeple people had taken. He was a harness maker, past 80, with hands like tree bark, and I had come to buy a bridle. Somehow we got to talking about a horse he'd lost, and I made some remark, half apologizing for caring the way I'd been trained to. He stopped working. He looked at me hard, and he asked me if I had ever actually read the beginning of the book. Then he quoted it from memory, in that steady way those old men have. In the beginning the breath of life was given to the animals with the very same words it was given to man. Here is the first passage, and I need you to sit with how specific it is. In the book of Genesis, in the first chapter, the creatures of the sea and the sky and the land are each called a living soul. In the original Hebrew, the phrase is nephesh, chayyah, living soul, living creature. And here's the part that stole the ground out from under me. That exact same phrase, nephesh, chayyah, is the phrase used for the human being in the second chapter when man becomes a living soul. Same words, same breath. The King James translators, working under commission, beginning in 1604 and finishing their great Bible in 1611, chose to render it soul for the man and creature for the animal. Same Hebrew, different English. A choice was made in the translating that your English Bible quietly carried into your assumptions. That old harness maker didn't need a seminary to know it. His people had been reading the German Froschauer Bible, the one the early Anabaptists carried out of Switzerland, printed in Zurich back in the 1520s and 30s. And their reading tradition never split the animal off from the breath of life the way the modern American pulpit did. He told me the split wasn't in the scripture, the split was in us. We invented it because it was convenient. And I sat on that porch and I felt the first crack of relief, the first hint that maybe the thing I'd been mocked for feeling was actually the more honest reading. But one verse doesn't undo a lifetime of certainty. I needed more. So I started digging, and what I found next made me angry, because it meant the comfort had been sitting in plain sight the whole time I was grieving. Therefore, let me give you the second passage, and this one is the one they should have read at my dog's graveside and never did. It's in the book of Ecclesiastes, in the 3rd chapter, written by the man traditionally held to be the wisest king who ever lived, and he writes something so blunt it's almost uncomfortable. He writes that man has no preeminence above a beast when it comes to the breath. He says they all have one breath. And then he asks the question directly out loud, thousands of years ago. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes downward to the earth? He asks it as a rebuke to the arrogance of assuming we know. The wisest man in Scripture refused to say animals have no spirit that goes on. He specifically named it, the spirit of the beast, not the biology, not the meat, the spirit. Now think about what I'd been told. I'd been told the Bible is silent. But here is a whole chapter treating the human and the animal as sharing one breath, one spirit, one uncertain and holy destiny that only God knows. That is not silence. That is a warning against the very arrogance the steeple had trained into me. And the plain people who read the whole of Scripture out loud in their homes rather than picking the comfortable bits never lost this chapter. I remember the night I found it. I was at my kitchen table under a single bulb, and I read that verse maybe 9 times in a row, and I put my head down on the wood and I wept. Because it was the first time in months I felt I hadn't been foolish to grieve. But even as the relief came, a colder question opened up under me. If this was always here, if it was this plain, then why had I never heard it? Who benefits from a man believing his love for a creature dies with the creature? That question is where the story stops being only about comfort and starts being about something that was done to us on purpose. Let me hold that question a moment and give you the 3rd passage first, because it widens the whole picture. Turn to the book of Romans, the 8th chapter. Paul writes that the whole creation groans and waits, and here is the phrase, waits for the redemption. Not just humanity, the creation itself. He writes that the creation was subjected to futility, not by its own choice, and that it will be delivered from bondage into freedom. The creation, the living things. Paul is describing a redemption that reaches wider than the human species, a restoration of the whole living world that God called good in the beginning. If animals simply cease, if they are nothing but temporary machines of meat, then this entire passage is nonsense. But it isn't nonsense. It's a promise, and it includes them. I brought that verse back to the harness makers community, to a preacher this time, a soft-spoken man who farmed with mules, and he told me something I have never forgotten. He said the English world reads the Bible to find out what it can keep and what it can throw away. He said his people read it to find out what God intends to save. And God, he said, intends to save more than you. That landed on me like a stone. More than you. The whole created order groaning toward home. But here is where it turned from comfort to something with an edge. Therefore, listen closely, because I started asking why the church I grew up in had quietly filed the animal soul away as a childish notion. And the answer, when I found it, was uglier than I expected. For most of Christian history, ordinary people lived beside their animals. The ox pulled the plow, the horse carried the family, the cow fed the children, the dog guarded the door. Your survival and your animal's life were braided together, and no farmer who ever watched a faithful horse die believed in his gut that it was worth nothing. The belief that animals are soulless machines is not ancient. It got its real muscle from a French philosopher named René Descartes in the 1630s, who argued that animals were mere automata, machines without feeling, that a yelping dog was no more suffering than a squeaking wheel. That idea was convenient, enormously convenient. Because if an animal is just a machine, you can do anything to it, you can work it to death, you can pen it in the dark, you can turn living creatures into units of production and never feel the weight of it. And that, I came to understand, is exactly why the idea spread. It didn't spread because it was biblical. It spread because it was profitable. The industrial world needed people to stop seeing animals as living souls, because a soul is inconvenient to an assembly line. The plain communities never took the bait. They kept farming with horses. They kept looking their animals in the eye. And so they kept the older, truer reading of Scripture that the machine world needed the rest of us to forget. And that, I came to understand, is exactly why the idea spread. But before I take you to the next passage, I want to tell you about something that helped me go deeper into all of this. When I started recovering these old plain readings, I realized I needed a way to hold all of it together, the scripture, the history, the practice, so I put it into a book. It's called Amish Foundations. And there are 2 companion volumes, Amish Mastery, that go further into the daily disciplines the plain communities use to keep these truths alive in an ordinary household. You'll find the details in the description below. If what you're hearing right now is landing somewhere real in you, those books were written for exactly that place. Now, let's keep going, because the 4th passage is spoken by God's own voice out of a whirlwind, and it changes everything. I want you to feel the size of what was taken, not just a doctrine, a whole way of seeing the creature at your feet as something God breathed life into and does not intend to throw in the trash. That was quietly lifted out of your inheritance, and you were told the Bible was silent so you wouldn't go looking, but we're looking now. And there are 4 more passages, and the 4th one is spoken by God's own voice out of a whirlwind. The 4th passage is in the book of Job, in those tremendous closing chapters where God finally answers Job out of the storm. And what does the Almighty talk about? Not theology, not human affairs. He talks about animals, page after page, the wild goats giving birth in the high rocks, the hawk that stretches her wings toward the south, the war horse who laughs at fear, the young ravens who cry out, and God who feeds them. God spends his great speech boasting about the wild creatures nobody owns and nobody profits from, describing their lives with the tenderness and pride of a maker who treasures what he made. In the book of Job, in the 38th and 39th chapters, God makes it unmistakable that these creatures matter to him directly, apart from any use to man. He feeds the ravens. He watches the doe. He delights in the horse. A God who delights in them does not discard them. The preacher with the mules read me that section by lamplight one evening, and when he finished, he closed the book and said, "A man does not go on and on about what he plans to throw away." I have carried that sentence for years. A man does not go on and on about what he plans to throw away. Now, maybe you're sitting there thinking, this is fine for people who live on a farm, people surrounded by livestock and open land, but what does it have to do with me and my house in town, with a cat on the windowsill and a small yard? I want to speak to you directly now, because the next part is built precisely for the life you already have, and you do not need 1 acre or 1 animal of livestock to use it. Here's what those plain families do that you can begin in your own home this very week with nothing but a Bible and a few quiet minutes. They read the scriptures aloud in the house together, including the passages about the creatures, and they do not skip them. When an animal in their care dies, they do not pretend it meant nothing. They speak of it, they mark it, they give thanks for the years it gave. This is not sentimentality. This is a discipline of honesty that keeps the heart from going numb, and a numb heart is exactly what the machine world wants from you, because a numb person spends more and questions less. Try this. The next time you sit with your animal, the dog by the stove, the cat in the sun, the old horse if you have one, read the 145th Psalm out loud, slowly, where it says, "The eyes of all wait upon God, and he gives them their food in due season, and he opens his hand and satisfies the desire of every living thing." Every living thing. Read it with the animal right there beside you. Something shifts when you do this. You stop seeing the creature as a possession and start seeing it as a fellow recipient of God's open hand. And when the day of grief comes, and it will come, you will not be standing in a gravel lot being told it was only an animal. You will already know better in your bones, because you spent the ordinary days treating that life as what Scripture says it is, a living soul under the same open hand that feeds you. That is the 5th passage, by the way, the 145th Psalm, and I slipped it to you inside the practical part on purpose, because that is how these truths are meant to live, not as arguments, as practice. The Amish don't win this debate. They simply live as though it were already settled, because for them it always was. But there is a 6th passage, and this one closes a door the skeptics love to leave open, because someone always says, "Fine, animals have breath, animals have spirit, but that's only for this life. Show me one place that says an animal is actually there in the world to come." And for a long time I couldn't answer that, until I was shown where to look. The 6th passage is in the book of Isaiah, the 11th chapter, the great vision of the peaceable kingdom, and read who is standing in it. The wolf dwells with the lamb, the leopard lies down with the young goat, the calf and the young lion together, the cow and the bear feed side by side, a little child leads them. This is Isaiah's picture of the restored world, the kingdom set right, and it is absolutely full of animals. They are not decoration. They are citizens of it. The vision of heaven on earth that the prophet was given is not an empty, sterile place of humans on clouds. It is teeming with living creatures at peace. If no animal has any place in the world to come, then Isaiah saw a lie. But Isaiah did not see a lie. He saw the truth that the machine world needed you to forget. The kingdom is full of them, and the seventh passage seals it because it comes from the very last book, the book of Revelation, the 19th chapter, where heaven itself is opened and the king comes forth. And how does he come? Riding a white horse. There are horses in the armies of heaven. The final vision of Scripture, the throne room of eternity, contains living animals. Now I know some will say that's symbolic. Maybe some of it is. But you cannot fill your holy visions of the eternal kingdom with living creatures from Isaiah's peaceable valley to the white horse of Revelation, and then turn around and tell a grieving man that animals have no place in eternity. The Bible's own pictures of forever are crowded with them. 7 passages, Genesis and the shared breath of life, Ecclesiastes and the one Spirit, Romans and the groaning creation waiting for redemption, Job and the God who boasts of his creatures, the 145th Psalm and the open hand that feeds every living thing, Isaiah and the peaceable kingdom full of animals, Revelation and the horses of heaven. That is not silence, that is a chorus. And it was sung over your head your whole life while someone told you the room was quiet. So how did the plain people hold on to all of it when the rest of the Christian world let it slip? That's the part I had to go find, and it led me to the thing I promised you at the start, the one buried record that ended my grief for good. I want to tell you how I found it, because it matters that this is real and not something dreamed up to make you feel better. I was in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, and I had been given permission to look through some old family papers that a Plain family kept in a wooden chest, the kind of household records these communities have passed down for generations, birth dates, marriages, deaths, planting records, the ordinary bookkeeping of a faithful life. And these were written in the old Pennsylvania German hand, the fractal script, some of it hard to make out. A younger member of the family was translating for me, and tucked into the pages, alongside the human deaths, dated to the 1840s, was an entry for the death of a horse. The family had recorded the death of a horse in the same book as their people, and beside it, in that old German hand, someone had written a line from Scripture and a few words of their own. The younger man read it to me slowly, and then, seeing my face, he read it again. The line of Scripture was from Proverbs, the 12th chapter, the 10th verse. A righteous man regards the life of his beast, and the words the family had added more than 170 years ago were these: He gave good service. God does not forget his creatures. God does not forget his creatures. Written by a farmer's hand in a family record next to a horse's name in the 1840s. Not a theologian, not a famous preacher, an ordinary plain family who simply knew and wrote it down for their children to read, that the God who made a creature does not forget it, that the years of good service given by a living soul are noted in heaven, not erased. I stood in that farmhouse and I felt something come back to me that the man outside the vet's office had taken, because here was a people who never once doubted it, who wrote it into their family Bible in the same ink as their own kin, who read Proverbs and understood that a righteous man regards the life of his beast because God does. That entry was the missing piece, not an argument, a witness. A family across nearly 2 centuries reaching out to tell me I had been right to grieve, right to love, right to refuse the tidy lie of the steeple. And here is the practice that record handed me, the thing you can do that ends the grief instead of feeding it. When your animal dies, you write it down. You take a piece of paper or a family book or the blank pages at the back of your own Bible and you record the name and the years and one true line. He gave good service. She waited at the window. God does not forget his creatures. You do what that Plain family did in the 1840s. You refuse the erasure. You put the life into the record where it belongs, next to the other lives you loved, under the eye of the God who Scripture says regards the life of the beast. This costs you nothing. It requires no farm, no preacher, no permission, and it does what no amount of being told to just get over it ever did. It tells the truth, and the truth, it turns out, is the only thing that ever actually healed me. I think about the man outside the vet's office sometimes, and I don't hate him anymore. He was only repeating what he'd been handed, the same convenient lie that got handed to me, the one that turns living souls into disposable machines so the world can use them without weeping. He didn't know that the Hebrew word for his own soul is the same word Genesis uses for the sparrow. He didn't know that the wisest king refused to say the animal spirit goes down. He didn't know that God spends the end of Job bragging about ravens and wild goats, or that Isaiah's kingdom is crowded with creatures, or that a horse carries the king in the last chapter of the whole Bible. Nobody showed him the way nobody showed me, the way until today maybe nobody showed you, but you know now, and you can't unknow it. The love you have felt for a creature who trusted you is not a weakness to apologize for. It is the most honest thing about you, and it is a small echo of the way God himself regards the life of his beasts. You were told a lie so that the animals of this world could be treated as things. The plain people never believed it, and now neither do you, and the collar in your hand or the empty bed in the corner is not the end of that life any more than it is the end of your love for it. If this gave you back something that was quietly taken from you, then you are exactly the kind of person this is for. The kind who will not keep repeating a comfortable lie just because everyone around you does, once you've seen what it costs. The kind who would rather hold a hard truth than a soft deception. That is the whole spirit of the plain life, and it lives in you already, or you would have clicked away an hour ago. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean this directly, because you are the sort who reads and thinks but stays quiet, and I am asking you not to stay quiet this time. Tell me the name of the animal you were told didn't matter. Just the name, down in the comments, and one line if you have it. He gave good service. She waited at the window. Write it into the record the way that family in Lancaster County did in the 1840s, and let it be seen. I read them, every one. And if you want to keep recovering the things that were quietly lifted out of your inheritance, the old readings, the buried practices, the plain truths the machine world needed you to forget, then come along with the rest of us who are done being fleeced of our own birthright. There is a movement of people here relearning what our grandparents knew and the marketers made us forget. Next time I am going to show you the Amish teaching on what happens to the family table when the last elder dies, and the one thing they always do with an empty chair that keeps a household from falling apart, because there is a reason their families hold together when ours scatter, and it starts with something they refuse to remove from the room. I gave you the overview here, but there's more waiting inside the plain living circle, where I walk you slowly through it all, line by line. And if a verse troubles you, you can ask me straight out and I answer you myself. No machine. You won't sit with this alone. Folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel any time with one click, no risk at all.